Hello, everyone. My name is Jessa Giordano, and I'm the Event and Community Relations Manager at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory. In my work as part of the communications team, I work with many people across campus on opportunities to engage directly with the public in events like the one we're hosting today. Unfortunately, our originally scheduled moderator, Dr. Charla Lambert, is unable to participate today, so I will do my best to fill her moderating shoes. I'd like to welcome you to today's Live at the Lab, where we'll be featuring Education Innovators in Coding. This is the second webinar in our Education Innovators series, and I encourage you all to check out the first one, featuring the DNA Learning Center's Amanda McBrien, who was recently recognized by Cranes New York for adapting hands-on programs to a virtual world in 2020. It's available on our website and on the lab's YouTube channel. Today, we'll be talking about why coding is so important to modern biological research and how teaching it to young students increases access to scientific careers. With us today are three panelists from the lab. Shaina Liu is a fifth-year Ph.D. student in CSHL's School of Biological Sciences. She studies neuroscience and is a coding camp instructor for the Women in Science and Engineering Initiative here, or WISE for short. Julia Wang is a second-year Ph.D. student in CSHL School of Biological Sciences, also studying neuroscience, and she's also a coding camp instructor for WISE. And Jason Williams is the Assistant Director of Inclusion and Research Readiness at CSHL's DNA Learning Center, which provides instruction in genetics, molecular biology, and biotechnology for middle and high school students on Long Island and beyond. I want to thank all three of you for participating in today's panel. I'm super excited about this discussion as it not only brings together biology, computer science, and education, but is a great opportunity to talk about how using computing can solve problems in biology and also increase access and equity in scientific careers. For those in the audience, please type any of your questions you have into the Q&A window, which you can click by clicking on Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll be able to see the questions coming through, and there'll be time towards the end for some Q&A from the audience. So to kick off the discussion, I'd like you all to introduce yourselves a little bit more. Let's start with Shaina. Can you describe a little about your research, the mission of WISE, and the coding camp that WISE runs?
Hi, Jessa, thank you for that introduction. That's a big question, so I'll break it down. The research that I do primarily concerns the spatial patterning of gene expression in the adult mouse brain. And more specifically, I'm interested in how different types of data sets that assay the spatial gene expression replicate with each other. With WISE, which is a group that I've been involved in, so it's as Jessa said, the Women in Science and Engineering group at CSHL. I've been involved with them for a few years now, but they started before even my time at CSHL in 2015. And it's a trainee-led group, so that means primarily postdocs and graduate students, research technicians, as well as research assistants when we do have them at the lab. And the mission of WISE is to essentially bolster women in science and engineering. And the way we accomplish that mission is across various different efforts, including outreach. And so that's sort of the umbrella that the coding camp falls under, is outreach to younger female identifying students who might be interested in science and engineering. So the coding camp is something, we just wrapped up our fourth coding camp last month. And it's actually something that CSHL has been doing for a long time, even longer than that. But this new version, we've sort of bought under the WISE umbrella and have changed the format, the exact language that we teach, and things like that over the years. But it's targeted to female identifying students in middle and high school who have no prior coding experience. And the major goal is to just get students excited about coding, to know that coding is a thing, and sort of make coding more visible. And I'm sure Julia will have much more to add to that.
Thank you so much. So Julia, leading off to you, could you describe a little bit about your research and your involvement in the coding camp, and also how you came to be an instructor for it?
Yeah, so I am, as you said, Jessa, which again, thank you for the introduction, a second year PhD student in Tatiana Engel's lab, and our lab studies computational neuroscience. So we use math and coding to try and understand the brain. And in particular, I have projects using different ways of looking at sleep in mice and other organisms. So coding is a really essential part of my research, as it's in the name even. And yeah, so I started volunteering with the Wise Coding Camp last year when I got here to Cold Spring Harbor at Shaina's suggestion, actually. And this year I was able to again teach and help organize it, which was really, really fun. And yeah, I've just always been passionate about not only teaching coding, but also teaching it to students, young students who may not have the same resources or opportunities or may not see themselves represented in computer science or tech right now. Yeah.
That's awesome. And do you have a program that you are involved with outside of the laboratory also?
Yes. So during my undergrad, I was involved, and I still am involved with a program, a nonprofit called AI for All, whose goal is to create resources and summer camps for high schoolers of different underrepresented groups and to get them interested in computer science and specifically artificial intelligence. And they really spread a really great message of diversity, inclusion, and really broad impact of computer science and artificial intelligence.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Julia. And Jason, can you talk a little bit more about the mission of the DNA Learning Center in general and the programs that you're involved in there?
Sure. So the DNA Learning Center is one of the operating units of Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory. And typically, pandemic aside, we would see about 30,000 students a year, either that visit in the form of a field trip to come have some type of hands-on science experience, or in some cases, actually visiting their schools. There are DNA learning centers all over the world that have either been modeled or that we actually collaborate to run. The newest one is in Nigeria, actually. The largest one is in Suzhou, China, with the Cold Spring Harbor meetings and courses in that same city. So it's really this unique opportunity and formula that we have for really taking some advanced biology and putting it into the hands of students, middle school and high school level, but also, especially on a national scale, really helping to transform undergraduate education, which is where I usually spend most of my time, in helping people bring advanced tools like coding, bioinformatics, data science into the undergraduate classroom, and as well as helping faculty who would like to know more about how to use these tools in their own research. So it's really a broad spectrum of all things educational, all things bioinformatics, biology, data science related.
Thank you. Thank you. So to start things off, I think for the benefit of a lot of our audience members who may not know, can you tell us exactly what is coding? I think a lot of people have an image of a person typing code onto a computer, but may not have a good picture in their head of what comes next.
Well, it just so happens, Jessa, that I made a slide, or made a couple slides along with Julia and Shaina about that topic, because coding gets thrown around, that word, but you may not know what it means. And so we just wanted to give you a little bit of context. We hope this is helpful with, a few minutes just to give you something to anchor yourselves at. This is what some people think of coding, a whole bunch of parentheses and, whether it's a green or a blue background or hacking in a movie or something like this. This is legitimate code, but nobody would want to work with this because it's really messily done. And it doesn't help you understand what coding is if you've never done it. So for anybody who has not been exposed to coding, just a really quick lesson, while I'm skipping ahead, we got a definition for you. And somebody says they don't see the slides in the chat. So let me just make sure I'm sharing. Are you seeing my slides? Everyone else?
I was at first, but right now, no. Maybe
okay,
try
let me just
sharing
go
again.
back and make sure. Try one more time to share that. No problem. Okay. Is that good?
Yep, we got it now.
Okay, great. So we've got a working definition of what coding might be. And that definition is that it's really the process of describing every step a computer needs to take to solve a problem. So that might sound simple, but let me explain what that means and why there actually is a little bit of, something you need to learn in order to do coding. And I want to relate it to something that probably everybody knows how to do, making a sandwich. It's getting close to dinner, so I'm going to be thinking about what I want. And if you think about making a sandwich, that seems like a simple enough task. But if you go back to what I said a moment ago, you have to explain every step to a computer, because a computer is not going to know what you mean when you want it to do something. So you have to explain in excruciating detail. What might that look like if I was explaining to somebody who really had no idea how to make a sandwich? I'd have to be almost pedantic. Like, you have to take your arm and you have to move it towards the bread and extend your arm and then maybe open your fingers, and then maybe how does the bread need to be oriented in order to start making that sandwich. So with a computer, it's actually this level of detail sometimes that you have to think through in your head. How it needs to do something, maybe rotate an object, or how math needs to be done. Whatever the case is, programmers really are about solving problems, but they have to solve them in these really formulaic ways. This is a little bit of what we would call in coding pseudocode, not completely true code, but not only do we need to think about the problem, but we need to translate it into something the computer can understand. It's almost difficult to believe that at one point we had programmers, actually most of the first computer programmers were women, who would have to think through these problems and then translate it into binary, into punch cards. Today we can still use words, but it would look something like this. This sentence that's down here in the bottom, where these words, if I was to try to translate that back into English, it's saying, if there's a piece of bread and the number of slices of bread you have are less than 2, then you need to use a function that somebody wrote somewhere to grasp the first bread slice, right? It starts to get complicated. And so while I think everyone can learn how to code, it takes some skill and it takes a little bit of practice. But that might give you an idea. Really what a coder does is think about problems they want to solve and then find ways to allow the computer to solve those problems. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an answer.
That's great. That's great. And then I think we have Shaina, are you taking next the sort of why coding and computer science are important for biology?
I think there's a couple slides that I have.
Great, I'll put those slides up for you because I have them in the same deck, it just turns out.
Yeah, so we also just wanted to, I mean, that was a really, really great explanation of what coding is, and it's really just as simple as that. But coding has actually become extremely pervasive in our world, as I'm sure many of you know. And so we wanted to let you know a little bit like how far and widespread coding has actually become. So obviously you've probably can guess that coding is really involved in websites and apps, whether it be, Facebook, Twitter, or whatever you have on your phone or your computer. All of that was coded by somebody, as well as artificial intelligence systems, like you may be familiar with like Siri or Alexa. Those also, it's another discipline in computer science. And then the one that perhaps we use the most at Cold Spring Harbor would be data analysis. So you can really take a lot of data and then make some graphs and try to understand it. And in particular, just to, tie it to real world events, we can take a look at how coding has affected COVID and the pandemic. So you may be familiar with TurboVax or other websites where you may have signed up for your vaccine. So again, as a website, it was coded by somebody. But also the graphs or the models that you may have seen on different news websites about how many cases or predictions, or also done by analyzing a lot of data using coding. And then even creating the vaccine, which is a very biological process. Anywhere in that process, from the development to the clinical research trials, I can guarantee you that there was coding at every step, including understanding the DNA and the structure of the proteins in the coronavirus molecules. Those also were done with the help of coding. So, it's really, really at every step and really pervasive. And I think Shaina is going to talk about coding here at Cold Spring Harbor.
Yeah, so thanks for that really great setup. Just to ground this abstract context even more for those of you who might be here because not necessarily the topic, but your support of Cold Spring Harbor. I just wanted to make it clear that coding is used in pretty much every lab at CSHL. So for some labs that might look more like reading and writing and running code on a daily basis, like in myself and Julia's research. And in other labs that might look more like the coding is more hidden away behind a user interface to run the machines that they use. But a few examples of the former that I wanted to share with you today are on the slide. So the first one on the left is just an image of the structure for hemoglobin. And so while we didn't discover the structure at CSHL, structures are discovered and all the time through the labs at Cold Spring Harbor. And to do that involves a lot of coding. So they're using really fancy microscopes to take pictures of these really small proteins, and then to go from that data to a structure prediction. All of that is code. And then another example closer to my research, but still not quite, is the research in one of my PI's labs through the International Brain Laboratory. So for example, in neuroscience, one thing that is really common are these behavioral rigs that are used to look at the behaviors of mice and other rodents to study as a proxy to study neuroscience. And to run these codes that can be really quite complex, from presenting a stimulus to the mouse, to recording the mouse's response, to videoing the mouse, to giving the mouse a reward. All of that is run by code. And most of that is custom code that people write to work with the hardware that they've also built. And finally, an example closer to me is something that I've actually done. So I mentioned a little bit my research in the beginning was looking at spatial gene expression. So that's just gene expression that is spatially resolved in the mouse brain. And so what you're looking at here is just two slices, very zoomed in, of the mouse cortex. And the kind of coding that I use in this case, for example, I chose this since it's quite visual, is to go from these images of just lots of dots in these two cases. And you can see this one's already been processed to be mostly black and white, but this has all this background. So I use code to go from these images that can be quite qualitative to get a quantification to compare the two images, which is what you see on the plot on the right. And that's all I have for you.
That's awesome. Thank you. That's very, very helpful. I think that gives a much better picture of how pervasive and important code is for biological work. So I have a question to ask all of you, but if you think back to when you first started writing code, what did you like about it? What drew you to it and sort of it compelled you to start tinkering with it, minoring, majoring, studying it in other ways? Julia, if you can continue and go first.
Yeah, when I was little, I really liked math, which I know is a little uncommon, and I really like solving puzzles. So when I was in high school, somebody suggested that I try out coding because of those interests, and I really liked it because, as Jason said, it's kind of like just solving puzzles every day. And then when I was in college, I decided to major in coding because I liked it so much, and also because I saw how, like I said, pervasive it is, and there's not just job opportunities, but there's many ways to combine coding with other interests I had, like neuroscience, which is why I'm here now. Yeah.
Perfect. And Shaina?
Sorry, I was muted. I think I came into coding a little bit later. So I was really interested in biology, and I sort of had an advisor. Basically, I guess he had the foresight to tell me that the future of biology will be coding. And he told me, just take an introductory course, see how you like it. And I'm really thankful for him because I loved it, and it's really benefited what I've been able to do since then, because I have this additional skill.
Great. And then Jason, if you can talk about your background, I know it's a little bit different.
Yeah, sure. It was not about taking it in class. In fact, I'd have to think. I don't know if I've ever really taken like a formal coding course. Certainly not as part of coursework in school, but it was something I sort of fell into and started being able to do. And also at a certain point realizing that it was part of my research later on in undergraduate. And then I realized that lots of people need to know how to do this. So if I'm going to teach it, I'm going to need to know how to do it. And they say that teaching is the best way to learn. So I definitely said, well, I'm just going to teach a course on this. Therefore, I'm going to go ahead and study and try to get into it. So it was slowly accumulating, and a lot of people are actually fully self-taught and pretty good coders from doing that. So I guess the message is for anybody that you could formally take a class in it, or if you're really interested and motivated, you can learn yourself, and they can both be really great ways in order to learn how to do it.
Perfect. And then Jason, also following up on that, is there any stereotype you had about coding or computer science as a profession that turned out not to be true? And has that sort of influenced how you teach it to people?
Sure, there are lots of stereotypes when it comes to coding and quote unquote geeks in general and something like that. And usually is maybe a very male dominated, maybe you don't see very much diversity sometimes when it comes to the idea of coding. And you could be exposed to those and feel one way or another. I was attracted like to the sort of the hacking, this idea of like you could have these special powers or make a computer do something. That was an attractive part of it. But also, I think that there's a feeling that a person who does code is sort of locked up by themselves. Maybe they're in a basement and they're not very social and they're sort of isolated. And what I would actually say is that, well, it's true that there are many different personality types and you can have any personality type and be a successful coder. But actually, for those who don't know or haven't encountered it, coding can actually be a really social activity. It really is a lot about collaboration. So as a biologist, it may be that you know a little bit about code, and then you have an expert like Julia or Shaina who know more than you about code. But if you know that little bit, you can be much more effective as a scientist. So collaboration in that way is very important. But even if you're just a pure straight up coder, lots of things that people do with code really rely on being able to work effectively with your colleagues, because most of the times the problems that you want to solve, you won't be able to solve them all. So your software needs to work with someone else's software, and therefore you need to talk or you need to be able to communicate effectively. And also, there's different names for this. Some people have called it hackathons. I'm in a group and we have a collaboration fest. There's an element of getting together to work on problems that lots of coders like that activity and like to be able to be with people. So really the message is that people of all personality types can find ways to interact with that topic and perhaps even find friends and collaborators to work with them on it. The stereotypes really aren't true.
An important point for people to realize. Shaina, I would ask the same question of you about sort of stereotypes that, you know, realizing that they're just stereotypes have helped you as you teach other people.
Yeah, I think that's a really great question and also important to address. So I was really fortunate to have an undergraduate education in an institution that was really focused on pedagogy and sort of really progressive in the way that it was educating its students. So I entered a department that had a few years prior to me joining sort of undergone a self-study of themselves and really focused on ways that they could recruit and retain women and minorities in computer science. And I think I really benefited from that. And I probably wouldn't have picked up a minor in computer science if it wasn't for being part of that department. I could go on about that for days, but two things that I saw that I carry with me when I design coding courses from my experience. was, as Jason mentioned, the importance of a peer group. So every assignment I did was paired programming. So that's just two people working on the same piece of code. And so I try to build that into courses that I design. And also having TAs or teachers assistants that were representative of the students themselves. Because I think, of course, you want to be able to see role models, but having TAs who have sort of been in your shoes as well, they know what it's like when the instructor is going and you have a text editor open and you've never used this text editor and suddenly you don't even know how to exit. It can be really easy to miss something and just get totally overwhelmed.
Another very good point. And then Julia, I would ask the same question of you.
Yeah, when I first started getting into coding, like in high school, as I said, I honestly didn't really have any idea what coding was. Somebody was just like, hey, you should try this. And I was like, okay. And I knew what a computer was, but I didn't know what coding was. And I think a lot of my vague idea was like, oh, like Mark Zuckerberg or like Steve Jobs, and they're like these kind of awkward white men. Honestly, I really didn't see myself in them at all. And I fell in love with coding because of how fun it was to me, because it was like problem solving. But I do remember constantly being one of the only women in all of my classes. And even as I went to college, that really grew, and I was constantly undervalued, underestimated. I would get the same grade or better than many of my guy friends, and they would get much more praise and much more recognition for their work. And so going off of all of that, I've really taken all of that into teaching, and I really want to show young girls or young whoever that role models that look like them, like Shaina said, are role models that are cool and have very diverse interests and diverse backgrounds and diverse profiles. And I also want to give them the tools to not underestimate themselves and not take being constantly underestimated and undervalued by others to heart. And that can be really hard, but I think it's really, really important for them to build those skills as well. Yeah.
Thank you. And then sort of in a related question, sort of, can you think about, what kind of effects and impacts you have all seen from making coding accessible to a young student who might be interested in biology as a career? Jason, if you want to start off with that.
Sure. It's always wonderful. And I love when I do teach coding, I'm reaching for a Post-it note because I have always little artifacts or memories or things like that about teaching. But I love teaching introductory coding, even though I could teach a few advanced things, because it's the first introduction somebody has to it. And that makes, what that impression is really could shape what comes afterwards. And there's certainly I've seen things, including coding, taught in such a way where I know if that was my first exposure to it, I would realize, oh, this is not for me. I'll never do it again. So really making sure that people feel welcome and that they can do it. And helping students work through it. I had a group of students who didn't choose. Oftentimes at the summer camps, we do have a coding summer camp at the Learning Center as well. And a lot of times students choose to take that because they're interested, but there was one camp where they didn't have a choice and they didn't know they were going to take it, and they struggled with it. I was wondering what they were going to say after the week was done, because it was, really challenging. They wouldn't have brought this on themselves. But at the end, they said, you know what, this is the most valuable thing that we did, because it was challenging, but they also even, at the high school level realized that this is very much connected to a job. Or a future opportunity. And as a biologist and a biologist educator, I also think that, especially at that early age when you maybe haven't committed to a career path, you are in the position which not only do you know biology, but you also have these coding skills, which could open up many doors. So even if you decide that biology, you don't want to go completely down one track of that, area of research, you can find other doors. And the same is true for older students, I guess, older learners, people of all ages, because I teach at different levels. And, what I'm looking for is this comment that someone wrote. It's a little bit washed out because we can't zoom in here, but it says, "I'm not scared of coding now," right? It focused briefly. This was one of many. I keep these all around me. It's wonderful when a graduate student, a postdoc, a full tenured professor writes one of those little notes as their feedback, because that's what we want to get over. A lot of times it's not that the coding itself is so big and scary. It's that we don't know what to expect, and we may not think, and we may underestimate ourselves. So getting into that and realizing that the people that do coding are humans, they're just like you. They can, they'll make mistakes. In fact, when we code, we always do live instructions so that I and whoever's teaching can make mistakes in front of the audience and show, yeah, oops, I forgot that. Or I look this up all the time because even though I do this every week, I forget how to do it. And that works. And that's really part of coding. So it makes a big difference to expose people to this, to let them find out if they have an interest in it, and if they find it engaging. That's really, really important. And to have it done in the right way so that people feel welcomed. And I think, as Julia says, also, if you can have role models or people that they can talk to so they can see themselves in also the people who are teaching them, that's an important opportunity to give people.
That's awesome. I love that note. I love that note. And I can tell, even though we can't see it, Jason said that he's got Post-its all around. So, and then I would ask a similar question for Julia and Shaina. In terms of the coding camp that you have both been involved in, what kind of impacts have you seen on some of the young girls who have been involved with that? Whichever one wants to take it.
I can kick off. So I think that's a really good question, and it sort of highlights one of the major weaknesses of our coding camp, because it is sort of a one-off deal. So actually, when I started doing it, I believe it was one weekend, and then we did 2 weekends. And then at some point when I was asked to teach this course again, I said, okay, I'm tired of teaching it like this. We need to make it a little bit more spread out and have take-home assignments, because if you're just doing it all condensed in one period over one weekend, I sort of felt like the value was very little. I mean, it was contributing to the excitement and the exposure, which are very important. But by spreading it out over a few weeks, we were hoping that it would increase the retention a little bit more. But of course, most of our impact we can only see in the feedback that we get from the students themselves, because we don't track these students long term. And generally, there's the occasional comment like Jason's Post-it, which I unfortunately don't keep around me, but those are really rewarding comments, of course.
Yeah, I can speak a little too, just adding a little bit. I love seeing people's faces like light up when they really connect with something, whether that be seeing how coding is used in a really, really cool way that they never anticipated, or really connecting with us like a role model or a speaker or something like that. And I've seen that so many times, and I've felt that too as well. The first time that I learned what artificial intelligence was, I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. I want to do that. And now that's what I do. And I will also say another thing that teaching coding has really taught me is that everyone kind of understands or begins to understand coding differently. It's like if you have ever done a puzzle with somebody, like a jigsaw puzzle, let's say, like you have a different strategy than your friend, but in the end you both are working on the same puzzle. That's kind of the same with coding too. And because of that, when I teach, I often try to explain the same thing in different ways so that hopefully one of them will stick. And then sometimes people feel kind of bad because it just happens the first way I explained it didn't really make sense to them. But then, the third way I explained it, that's what made them click, and you can really see it. And they get really excited that they have like this boost in confidence, like they got it, like it makes sense to them now. And it's just so lovely to see. And many of my students, although unfortunately I don't keep up with them, but I see that they've decided to major in computer science or do more stuff with computer science. And that's really wonderful. Yeah.
That's awesome. And then sort of a related question. What about, and this I guess is really directed mostly at Shaina and Julia again, is what about in the lab? What effects have you seen yourselves as being a computational scientist engaged in interdisciplinary research with more traditional bench scientists? Like, do you find, I guess just talk about that experience a little bit, because not everybody knows how to code, but every lab uses coding. So what has been your experience as, you're both PhD candidates who know coding? And again, whoever wants to take it first.
Do you want to go first this time, Julia, since I took the last?
Okay, sure. Yeah, I have only been here for 2 years, but already I have experienced so much. Like, one thing that I really love is that coding has allowed me to collaborate with a lot of different other professors in other labs. And for instance, I'm working on a project that is involved with sleep. So I get to collaborate with some other neuroscience professors that work on sleep. But that project is also related to cancer. So I get to collaborate with another professor that works on cancer, which is something that I honestly never thought I would be studying. So that is really, really cool. And another thing that I have learned is that a lot of the professors or other people who don't know how to code somehow think that we're like really, really smart because we know how to code. They're like, oh my God, you have this skill that we don't have. But in the reality, it's just that I happen to have one set of skills and they happen to have another set of skills. And sometimes that can make communication a little bit hard because we have to talk to each other, very often. And sometimes we don't know how to communicate. But more so, I think it makes for really, really interesting conversations because we have different mindsets when we come into tackling a problem or asking a scientific question. And that really helps us because I can come in from a mathematical mind and they can come in with a more, biological or experimental mind. And then we come up with really, really cool solutions. So yeah, I think that's most of, I don't know if I answered the question. But yeah, Shaina.
Yeah, that was a great response, Julia. I think I'll speak more from not my personal experience, but from what I've observed in others. I think a lot of labs at Cold Spring Harbor have maybe one or two people who are sort of like the data centers, and they're responsible for processing all the data for that lab. And that can, for wet labs, at least I'm speaking about wet labs. And that can sort of be a bottleneck because obviously it's a huge job for one or two people to do. And so when I see bench scientists start to get to the level of coding where they are self-sufficient, where they can just Google things and figure it out, it really kind of unlocks a whole world of research for them because suddenly they can design experiments and targets for their experiments based on pre-processing all this data that's already out there. So you're both saving your own time and you're maybe making smarter decisions. And then you're also not dependent on the one or two people in your lab who are the saving grace for most people. So I think being able to code increasingly is a huge part of your job as a biologist, whether it's 100% of the time or you're mostly at the bench.
Good message there. And then sort of like as a final question before we head into Q&A from the audience, but this is, I think, a big question. What about the general public? Why should the general public care about coding? Or maybe a better way to ask is, what happens when the people who write code don't represent the broader populations and communities that the code serves? And Julia, I think you might have some sort of data on this.
Yes, again, we have some slides if Jason will share. So I think we've pretty much hammered into you before how pervasive code is in our everyday lives. You definitely interact with code every single day or something that was influenced by code. So we wanted to share some statistics with you guys and show you how diversity is really important. And then after that, I think Shaina and Jason can also like have their input or share their experiences. So there is a big problem with diversity in tech, and this may be something that some of you may be familiar with, but just to give you an idea, taking some of the biggest names, biggest tech companies that you've probably definitely heard of, in terms of gender, women only make up, you know, anywhere from 20 to 30% of the technical roles at the company, which is definitely not where they should be. And also, if you look at the amount of girls that are interested in computer science in, say, high school, the number is closer to 50%. So somewhere along the way, these girls are being discouraged from continuing with their computer science education or career. So that can be a really big problem. And then if you go to the next slide, the numbers are even worse for underrepresented racial minorities such as Black, Hispanic, and Indigenous peoples. So as you can tell, again, the same companies, the numbers are pretty dismal. And it's the same story. These people have the interests, or maybe they don't have the resources, but somewhere along the way, they're getting edged out. And why is this a problem, you may ask? So this can cause some really big problems in the products that are made. So if you go to the next slide, there can be a lot of bias in the products that we use every day. So for instance, these can be really harmful. Like there was a New York Times study showing that, or New York Times article about a study that showed that facial recognition systems were extremely biased and falsely identified African American and Asian faces. Google Translate can have bias. So if you take a language like Turkish, which is gender neutral, so there's no gender pronouns, and then you translate it to English, it'll choose different pronouns based on what you have. So for doctor, it'll choose he, but if you say nurse or like cleaner or baker, you know, that those will give you female pronouns. So that is actually coded into the system itself. And then these sort of biases can also be more implicit and a little bit less overt. So if you Google unprofessional versus professional hairstyles, which is those two images, you get something I think that is a little bit more noticeable than just the professionalism of the hairstyle. Also, there's a question of why are all your digital assistants, your Alexa, your Siri, your Cortana, why are they women? You know, what does that say about women being subservient or being expected to be assistants? And so I think it's just to say that everything that is on your computer or on your phone or is coded was coded by somebody, and that person has biases that can be implicitly or explicitly injected into what they make. And so it's really, really important to have a diverse collection of people working on these problems so that we can eliminate those biases. Yeah.
You're muted, Jessa.
Sorry, that was a great summary. And we definitely have some questions coming in from the audience, but I wanted to give Shaina and Jason a chance if there was anything you wanted to add to that, sort of why the public should care about coding and who's doing coding.
I think you really said it, Julia. Maybe to take it one step further, it's tremendous. It's almost unimaginable how pervasive coding and the impact or the effects of coding are on our lives. We really just mostly don't realize it, right? Most of the other sciences, like, you know, experiments that might be going on physics or something that might be happening in biology, you know, ultimately those may interact with you or not, or you may get to make a decision about whether you want to interact with them or not. But what happens with coding, it's just so implicit and so behind the scenes, you know, what type of advertisements do you get shown, or what type of movies get recommended to you? Those things influence you in ways that we still don't completely understand. But You know, Facebook is probably one of the biggest examples. And if you also think about it, the algorithms and the things that coders, you know, if a company has a profit motive, their motive is to get you to click as many times as they can get you to click on something. So unfortunately, sensational images or outlandish stories get more of a reaction, and therefore they're shown more, even if they're not based in facts. And so that just sort of snowballs into something where you can actually have people that are misinformed. And our intention, you know, usually we look things up on the internet, right? Or even just to give you like a really, really, you know, seemingly innocuous example, how many times have you bought something on Amazon because you're looking at the stars and you're feeling, oh, well, this one has one more star or a half, you know, a half more star, maybe it's better. But how are those stars actually generated? Are they really actually reliable? Oftentimes they really don't have any basis in something that should cause you to make a decision, but you feel great about your decision because you picked the 4-star one versus the one that was the only 3.5, right? So we kind of outsource our critical thinking to computers in ways that aren't really good. We will always have biases and we will always make mistakes, but if we make them together in a way that's equitable and inclusive, we can really eliminate a lot of those mistakes before they get made, because you have people who can reflect, you know, and frankly, it's not just ethnicity and gender, it's also age, right? If you come from a generation where there aren't a lot of coders in your generation, you're being discriminated against in some way. So it really means that we have to not approach coding as something that's innocuous and purely trustworthy, but that we have to really have conversations. Even if you on this webinar have never coded, you need to do your own research and look into some of these things so that you can talk about them and find out more, because they impact us and we have a right to know how they impact us so we can make better decisions.
Thank you, Jason. And then Shaina, I didn't know if you have anything else to add on that.
Yeah, I think those two really hit the nail on the head and gave really excellent examples. I just wanted to say, kind of building on what they both said, zooming into a specific example, even if you are able to be critical of the algorithms that we interact with now, it's sort of important to realize that the decisions that the programmers are making now will influence the next generation, right? So let's think, for example, about all the digital assistants having female voices and female names. You might be okay with that, and which is fine. Like you can change the defaults or whatever, and that might be okay. But think about the children now who are growing up and they just think, oh, assistant equals female, right? So that might be innocuous, but those examples can become, you know, you can extrapolate from that really quickly to things that can become detrimental and just sort of ingrained biases today into the future that we might not want to live with.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. So I want to start with some of the questions that have come in. So one, just to start with, how early can you introduce kids to coding?
I think, Julia, since you've had this experience, maybe do you want to?
No, I have. I mean, now I see like there's like books for like before you can even read, you can code apparently. There are definitely websites where sometimes that are geared to like elementary school kids, like putting blocks, and then you could make like a little robot move around. So apparently as soon as they're bored, as soon as they could stand up. Yeah, I think it's never too early nor never too late to learn how to code. Yeah.
I guess the only thing I would say to that is that if you are interested in your child, or your grandchild, or your young, whatever, whoever that young person is, I think I would encourage people to approach it with not really strong expectations that, oh, they better learn this, or they must do this, or they won't have a job if they can't do that. I think if you put too much pressure, rather than just sort of exposing them, letting see, you know, what do they respond to, and there's many different things. You might be coding to make video games, and that might be much more attractive to you than coding to solve a scientific problem. So I would encourage you to expose it to people, but not with an atmosphere of pressure, because if you don't enjoy it already, just like maybe piano lessons, you might play for a while, but then you're going to hate it and walk away. So just be realistic about those expectations.
Probably a very good point. A few people are asking about what languages, what computer languages you folks teach in your different programs.
So we, the coding camp for WISE in particular, started out using JavaScript. That was just, the choice for JavaScript was because AP Computer Science is in Java. Maybe that's not true. But anyway, that was, we stopped using JavaScript and we switched to Python because I think Python is a really good, friendly first language. And it's also my personal language of choice. So instructor's bias, I guess.
We also, and this will answer other questions I see popping up, we do have a high school week-long summer camp at the Learning Center, which people can sign up for now. We teach that in Python. I also teach R, so I think Python and R are probably the two languages that you will see a lot in biology. R is really useful for statistical analysis and visualizations. The final thing I'll say about languages is that once you understand how to code in one language, it's not 100% just easy to transfer to another language, but it's actually you can pretty much teach yourself other languages fairly easy, kind of like going between Spanish and Italian and French. You'll still need to learn more, but most of them are closely enough related that once you understand the underlying concept, you can learn something else that you need.
And then also related, especially for Julia and Shaina, do you also, the coding that you do in your labs, is that also in Python, or is there another language that's involved there?
Yeah, I mostly work in Python. Other people in my lab also work in this language called MATLAB, which a lot of neuroscientists use. I think R is also pervasive. And even some people use C or C++ in mostly other labs. Yeah.
Yeah, that covers the gamut. It's the same from what I've seen. I think in biology, the three most popular are MATLAB, R, and Python. And people will sometimes reach into C or C++ for speed, but usually we interact with those through third packages that wrap a higher level language like Python and R around those languages.
Thank you. As far as the gender bias that clearly exists in this country, is that also something that seems to exist worldwide as far as those that are involved in tech globally? And it's okay if you don't know. That's just was one of the questions from the audience.
Yeah, I have to say I really don't know as much about other countries. I happen to know way too much about the history of coding in America, but I think a lot of influence of coding worldwide is from Silicon Valley or early coding that happened in America. So my guess is that it probably has a lot of influence in other countries as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Do you find that, and this is a question for all three of you, do you find that you look at the world differently being a coder? Do you find, and I know especially, if you've been doing it for a long time, it might be sort of hard to bring yourself back to before you knew coding, but do you find yourself maybe having a different perspective?
I don't know how different. I mean, one thing is when things go wrong, sometimes I'm like, I know what they did. Or you kind of I know what happened, or I could see how this problem crept up. I think one of the things, the most important thing, and I think maybe Shaina, you touched on this, is you realize that there are problems that it opens you up to solving that you could never solve on your own. I've taught around the country and around the world, and you hear stories sometimes of, in my case, since we're usually teaching scientists, of graduate students crying and in tears because they have to enter 3,000 rows of data into Excel, and like they're doing some task that will take them most of their PhD, and they didn't realize that there was an easier way. And scientists are used to being able to hit brick walls and do that for a long time until something finally works. So we have a high tolerance for frustration and pain sometimes in pursuit of research. But coding can open up the idea that actually a lot of the problems that you want to solve can be done more efficiently and can be done quickly if you can learn how to code. So I think it kind of, oftentimes when I've dealt written papers with people where I'm in charge of the analysis, and how I guess I would summarize it is that no matter what they ask me, if I can do it, the answer is yes. I may not know at that moment how to solve the problem, but I know it can be solved. And so that's actually a positive thing about coding. Like, no matter how frustrated I've ever been with any problem, there's always been an answer. And so coding gives you that. It's a lot easier than wet lab biology because there may not be an answer in some ways. So there are really nice positive parts to it. And so maybe that's a difference that I see in the world.
I saw that question earlier, and I love that question. So I have a little bit of a different take. I think maybe coming into coding later in my life. I think I was 19 or something, which is still pretty young, but it was really eye-opening for me because for the first time I realized like our world is run by algorithms. For example, like I was waiting for an elevator and I was like, oh, if multiple people push the elevator button on multiple floors, like which floor is it going to go to first? Like somebody made a decision to like move the elevator the way that it does, right? And it was probably a totally innocuous decision that runs every elevator by that brand. But I think that's just like, I've seen like, it just totally opened my eyes to how things, like a whole nother level of how things function that we interact with.
I will not take the elevator the same way. Julia, do you have something to add to that?
Actually, I feel like maybe in contrast to Shaina and Jason, like I hadn't really thought about this question until just now. I learned to code in high school, so maybe a little bit earlier, but also before that, like I said, I did a lot of math. And so I always kind of had an analytical way of looking at things. I think one way that coding really, like I learned throughout my learning of coding is that, kind of going off what Jason said, even though I have I literally have a degree in computer science, there is so much about computers and so much coding that I don't know. And I learned that you should never be ashamed of not knowing something because the answer is at your fingertips. You just have to go, honestly, you just have to go and Google it and you have to go and find it and you can learn anything, right? And it's what the value is not in what you know or how much you know, it's in how flexible you are and how willing you are just to go and learn, you know. And yeah, I think that's something I learned from coding.
Well, with that, and I love all of those reflections. Again, it shows how varied and different coding can be. I think the example that you gave, I think Julia, you gave about how people learn coding differently and understand it differently, the same way they might attack a puzzle differently. It's also what people get out of it and how it changes their perspective can also just be as individual, which I think is very, very cool. So we're at 6 o'clock. I think we're finished now. I want to thank you, Julia, Shaina, and Jason, for being with us and a great discussion. I want to thank all of our attendees for signing on. We will be having another Education Innovators webinar sometime later in May. So please, watch our website at cshl.edu for information there. And I hope everybody can enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. But thank you very much for coming.
Thanks
All right.
so much.
Thanks for moderating.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.